I'm David Levi Strauss. I'm the chair of the MFA program in Art Criticism and Writing here at SVA. And this is the first lecture in our spring series here in the new theater. We'll continue this series February 12th with John Yao discussing common motifs in the work of Jasper Johns, Catherine Murphy, and Thomas Niskowski. March 5th with Mick Tausig speaking about drawings in anthropological fieldwork notebooks. And Tuesday, April 7th with Avital Ronell, Nietzsche Loves You. If you want to be on the mailing list, if you're not on it, see Una, who's got a list here to sign up. Susan Buck-Morss is professor of political philosophy and social theory at Cornell University and the author of The Dialectics of Seeing, Walter Benjamin and the Arcades Project, The Origin of Negative Dialectics, Adorno, Benjamin, and the Frankfurt Institute, Dream World and Catastrophe, The Passing of Mass Utopia in East and West, Thinking Past Terror, Islamism and Critical Theory on the left, and Hegel, Haiti, and the Universal History. I carried around and read Thinking Past Terror, I think, until my copy fell apart. She's a scholar and writer of great reach and insight, and we're very pleased to have her here tonight to speak about visual empire. Afterwards, we'll open it up for question and answers from you, and again, thanks for coming. Susan Buck-Morss.
Okay, so this is a talk that, hopefully we're passing through this stage. The politics of this talk was a lot about George W. Bush. It kind of comes from this whole realization that we had that we thought we lived in a democracy, but somehow in the international realm, there seemed to be a lot of one man saying what was going to happen, and no one could say anything different. So that was kind of what got me interested in the problem of sovereignty and sovereign power and the imperial use of the question of vision and empire. So here we go. Just when it appeared that the nation-state was waning in significance as a consequence of the global economy, the issue of sovereignty is back in the spotlight. Present debates have taken on a special urgency in the United States, where sovereign right was proclaimed persistently by a recent president who attempted to justify policies of military aggression and violations of international law and human rights, executing these policies with disregard for judicial and constitutional procedures. A book by the Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben, State of Exception, recently touched off a small case of collective hysteria among American academics by claiming that by their intrinsic nature, democracies undermine themselves, that dictatorship is unavoidable in modern politics, and that the sovereign's power to declare a state of emergency, and with it, a state of exception to the law, places potentially the whole world under the sign of the concentration camp. Like, next. This is cue for the image.
Go with the image.
Yes. Okay, this is an Ouroboros, 15th century alchemical sign. Plato in the Timaeus described a self-eating circular being as the first living thing in the universe, an immortal, perfectly constructed animal that ate its own excrement and kept going. Agamben seems to be shocked to find that such an animal does not exist. It is a logical truism that something cannot be a member of its own set, that constituting power cannot be synonymous with constituted power. There's something that remains external to that process. If democracies could be self-constituting and self-reproducing, if they could realize the perfect closure of the Ouroboros, the snake consuming its tail, there would be no decay, but also no history. and therefore no hope, no escape from the magic circle of power that is capable of mystifying any political regime, no matter how democratically conceived. The historical event that ruptures the circle's mythic repetition is also the possibility of a different and better future. Walter Benjamin believed that the watered-down versions of democracy in his own time in Weimar Germany had become little more than bourgeois governing cliques. The sovereign who declares a state of exception would then be the voting citizens themselves. The question we need to ask is why Jefferson's call for permanent revolution has not been predictive of history of democracies. Why does popular sovereignty consistently resurrect an aura of quasi-mystical power around the sovereign figure, which, at least since Hobbes's Leviathan, has been recognized as a merely human artifact, a mortal God? Next. And this is the very famous frontispiece to Hobbes's Leviathan, and in that torso of the sovereign, of course, you have all the little figures of the people who make up this mortal God, but then cast themselves down before it, because not to do so is to expose themselves to too much danger. Okay, so in a democracy where only citizens have the legitimate right to declare a state of exception to the law, the real scandal occurs when an executive branch usurps that power and is allowed to get away with it. How is it that the exposure of lies, the staging of news events, the blatant manipulation of the law does not disenchant the U.S. presidency? Why is it that critical reason or the revelation of just plain facts is not an adequate antidote to the mythic hold of sovereign power? Even in the modern era, sovereignty remains a transcendent category. It connects present and visible power to an invisible and absent source. The sovereign figure as a personification of the collective is iconic in the theological sense that it embodies an enigma, precisely the collective's power to constitute itself. Sovereignty relies on the iconic image to close the circle between constituting and constituted power. As long as the circle appears closed, sovereign power remains intact. Likewise and counterclockwise, as long as sovereign power remains intact, the circle appears closed. And this explains why the lies of a merely human individual sovereign can be exposed, and it still does not shake the faith of the believer. The closing of the circle demands a miracle, and the icon of the sovereign figure provides it. As a metaphysical figure, the sovereign connects the world of lived politics with a Platonic world of eternal forms. The legitimacy of political power continues even in secular modernity to maintain this ideal connection. Next. You're looking at an aerial photograph from 1918 where soldiers at the brink of war are making an image of Woodrow Wilson on the campgrounds. In U.S. political experience, the American people is the Platonic form that operates, an imaginary collective to which George W. Bush's rhetoric habitually appealed. In Hitler's Germany, it was the ethnic folk. In the Soviet Union, the proletariat was a no less metaphysical concept. The Bolshevik Party ruled in the name of the proletariat as an ideal, not an empirical reality. Next. The truth of the matter is that politics and religion are never severed from each other so long as the figure of the sovereign holds sway. It is in the realm of foreign policy that this theological residue is most persistent and most pernicious. This is where the sovereign power remains intact, where sovereign power remains intact in modernity. The anthropomorphized struggle of the political collective against its enemies is the sovereign's favored playing field. Its most powerful role as the iconic embodiment of the people become flesh. The antidote is not to rely on reason's power of demystification. Rather, it is to return to the theological problem and rethink it on different grounds.
Next. Early Christian philosophy was formed within the context of a revival of Platonic metaphysics, centrally concerned with the relationship between earthly and ideal forms and the enigma of the connection between them, precisely the question we posed politically concerning the sovereign figure. You're looking at a 12th century Kiev icon of the great Panagia, the Virgin Orans, with this kind of pose. The fundamental idea of Christianity is the incarnation, the coming into visibility of the invisible and sovereign God through virgin birth. The veneration of icons became the practical manifestation of this idea as the point of visibility of the relationship between divinity and humanity, Virgin Mother and child, Redeemer and believer. The icon, where the word, logos, i.e. the ideal concept, takes on flesh, in our case the political sovereign as the fleshy embodiment of the collective, provides direct experiential access to these enigmatic relationships. Now, the term used by the early church writers to describe the relationship of the incarnation was economia, economy, a discourse of practical belief rather than reasoned theological argumentation. Now, a semantic warning is in order. Our own times had developed a quasi-religious cult around the economy itself, a belief that it is the locus of invisible forces that produce a whole range of visible effects, necessitating its management by global institutions and creating its own pragmatics of governance and hierarchy of power, an economy of the economy, so to speak. One is reminded of Benjamin's short piece, Capitalism as Religion, on the cultic nature of capitalism, where the icons, or Benjamin, are the portraits on paper money. There is a parallel between our own fetishized concept of the economy as an autonomous, self-regulating system, a modern-day Ouroboros, and the Christian economy of belief, one that suggests that today's globally extended belief in the economy is itself a form of idolatry. Economia had an earlier use in pre-Christian Greece, of course, that is often cited as the secular origin of the term as we use it today. In his treatise on politics, Aristotle understood economy as a pragmatic science for the orderly governance of the household, the oikos, the fundamental agrarian unit of
based on patriarchal relations of inequality and interdependence, husband-wife, parents-children, and that to which Aristotle gives his great
attention, master-slave. Economos, literally household law, provides social cohesion at the level of production as the precondition for political life. But even for Aristotle, this law presupposes a historically prior moment, the original appropriation of the land on which households are established. Land may be claimed or conquered, confiscated or colonized. The more violent means were political reality in the expanding empire of Alexander the Great, whose tutor Aristotle was. This original appropriation, the historical rupture that produces what Carl Schmitt calls the nomos, the violently imposed ordering law that legitimates all subsequent laws, is presumed in household management, as are slaves as the trophy of war. Aristotle's economia accepts private property and human inequality, both of which precede the polis and determine its form. Now, it was the Apostle Paul who seized radical title to the nomos by an original appropriation of the word itself. In the Pauline epistles,
economia, through a stunning translation, morphs into the Christian order of God. The divine economy inverts the earthly one. All are equal, including slaves. All are brothers, including women. Church administrators are not masters, but themselves fools, slaves who do God's work. This household knows no territorial boundaries. Quote, now therefore ye are no more strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and of the household, the equals of God. That's Ephesians 2:19. The established nomos is suspended by Paul. Quote, for ye are not under law, but under grace. harmony, says Romans 6:14. Paul is against the law, as Alain Badiou writes in Affirmation. All light is placed on the historical event, its disorderly power. Badiou announces race is illegal, is the subversion of Paul. The historical rupture of the event of the Incarnation is the source of what can be called a new Christian nomos, an antinomial nomos, that disrupts earthly power and holds it in abeyance. At the same time, the term economia reasserts its law-preserving function, commanding the obedience of the new man, Paul's repeated term, to live according to Christianity's predestined plan. The revolutionary implications of Paul's newly revealed economy are thus limited, and given Paul's renaissance of popularity among critical theorists today, Matthew, Zizek, Gambit, to name a few, these limitations need to be kept in mind. If for Paul there is no principle of exclusion regarding citizenship, if the church's equality includes women and slaves, their position as foreigners in the earthly city and as women and slaves in the earthly household remains unchanged. Paul called himself a slave to do God's work, but he chooses in life to be tried as a free man and a Roman citizen. In Paul's Christianity, God's household coexists with Aristotle's patriarchal one, as his kingdom coexists with the empire of pagan Rome. The insufficiencies of religion as an alternative politics, unspoken by the historical Paul, would remain concealed not because they were invisible, but because they did not belong to the economy of truth. Only by leaving the magically closed circle of belief with its immanent logic would these contradictions become apparent. Only by the incorporation of temporal power into the Christian economy would they appear to disappear, which is, of course, what happened in the early 4th century with the conversion of the Roman Emperor Constantine to Christianity and its elevation to the official state religion by the centuries. Quote. Next. Okay, now you see there, this is the famous Barberini picnic from about 540. Some people say it's the Emperor Justinian, of course, some people say it's Anastasius. The point is that above the Emperor is someone who looks very, very similar, who is, of course, Christ. You're getting a Christianized Roman Empire fell within the mimetic logic of correspondences. One God, one emperor, uniting church and empire into a single world, a single historical narrative, and a single visual economy. The folding of temporal power into the religious economy finds expression in the public visibility of belief that reached a high point under Justinian I, whose image you may see here, nearer to that of Christ. Now, art historians describe this development in terms of the origin of Christian art, although Christian visual economy might be a less misleading term. The iconography built on pagan precedents, Imperial Rome's visual culture was already well developed before the adoption of Christianity, and there were constant exchanges between Christian and imperial imagery. Byzantine visual aesthetics, blending the iconicity of Imperial Rome with that of the Incarnation, created an immense force field of effective power. Now, what was new about the Christian imperial nomos was precisely the economy of power of the sovereign's transcendent claim that brought into alliance the economy of belief and the economy of power, a double discourse of spirituality and conquest. The sovereign figure of the emperor became the iconic embodiment of Christian political legitimacy. In keeping with Paul's inversion of the economy of power, by bowing down before an enthroned Christ, the gesture of prostrations or veneration. Next. So there's the emperor bowing down before the enthroned Christ. And this act of submission while true to Paul's inversion of servant and master, resulted in an enormous gain of sovereign power. Pauline writes that this involved, quote, an entirely new understanding of the Roman emperor's role, inconceivable except within the context of allegiance to a universalist religion. The more the emperor subjected himself to God, the more God subjected to him the whole world. In short, God was the Christian side of the big time. Next. Protestants since the Reformation have pointed out that the New Testament never mentions the icon, nor does it deal specifically with issues of visual representation. This is true in regard to the icon as artifact, which we see here, an object of veneration, but it was art historians who initiated a terminological differentiation, reserving the term icon for a specific genre of portable artifacts painted on wood, venerating the Virgin Child, or Christ, or the saints, whereas the sources themselves do not make this distinction. So scholars are right to insist that Paul affirmed the foundational idea of the icon, the relationship of the visible and the invisible, making visual the invisible in the icon, because of his repeated assertions that Christ was Lord, quote, in the image, he thought, of the invisible God. And it was Paul whom the Christian church theorists cited in support of the icons in the centuries later struggle against iconoclasm. Manzan makes a compelling argument for the centrality of the icon for what needs to be called the political philosophy of the Byzantine Empire, Christian and imperialist in nature, that is expressed in the visual economy of the image. She describes the Christian economy as, quote, a science of relations and relative terms, a set of correspondences rather than equivalences among disjunctive realities for which icons are the structural relay, weaving together the whole like a one-of-a-kind top. Mary, the Virgin Mother of God, that's true, as the untarnished, pure place of God become flesh, is the central icon of this economy, providing the pictorial equivalence of the entire New Testament message of the Incarnation. Next. This is a wit, the monastery of St. Apollo in the 5th century. The icon is key to political legitimacy in Christian society, that is, Christian nomos, that became the legitimation of world domination. Now, I'm not suggesting that the whole visual economy is a ruse deployed consciously by authorities as an instrumental means of deliberate and cynical manipulation. On the contrary, from within belief, there is only piety and affective engagement. The point is that this Christian economy needs no proof or reason explanation. The icon is instrumental not because seeing and believing the divine itself remains invisible, but because the believing viewer feels in the presence of the Incarnation that is in no way thereby robbed of its mystery. In a subtle but profound transformation, iconicity found a new visual order of power. Next. This strikes art historians because I have two very images up there. The top one is Ravenna from the mid-6th century, and the bottom of Hagia Sophia in the Constantine. I don't really care about the dates because the concept remains phenomenally constant throughout the Christian Roman Empire. Now, I also want to say that these structures are truly beautiful, but that which the art historian admires, the critical political theorist warns us with an enormous intensification of centralized power and ideological conformity. Ravenna, we've been there discussing before, this is Justinian's doing. But Justinian persecuted brutally the area It is difficult to exaggerate the importance of the new visual economy in the vast imperial project that I am calling the Christian Nomos, and that Monzan describes as the first iconoclasy. José Monzan is a French philosopher who should be known better, and I'm relying on it here in this part of the presentation. She points out that it's difficult to exaggerate the importance. Oh wait, I already read that. That she calls the first iconoclasy. Although at first anchored in the church edifice as a microcosm of the Christian world, icons were also increasingly portable, traveling on tour to perform miracles, and displayed in processions that walked around cities in order to prevent the cities from attack. Like the imperial coins that circulated throughout the economy of political power, they circulated throughout the economy of belief. Next, famous icon on your right, by Andre Lucia, and on the left are imperial coins of Justinian II, right side, one side, against the other. There is, Monzan writes, no limit to the spread of the power of the image. Indeed, the spread of icons exceeded the boundaries of the Byzantine Empire that was radically diminished as a consequence of expanding Islam, causing a disjuncture of power in the Christian Nomos between the Byzantine Empire and the Byzantine Church that shaped the political context of the iconoclasm crisis. Next. Icon was trying to orthodoxy, celebrating the victory of those who loved the icons against the Byzantine emperors who tried to destroy the icons. The victory of the church was being free. Monzan writes, we are today heirs and propagators of the iconic empire, with Byzantium in the process of globalizing across the whole world as begun. We are at the close of our argument that we move in Monzan from the Byzantine iconoclasy to the modern empire of the gaze, from the patriarchal church management to the global media industry, from the first national empire to our own. In an aside that stands out to readers excluded from the charmed circle of Byzantine scholars, Monzan writes, quote, from the specific standpoint of provoking belief or obtaining obedience, there are no great differences between submitting to a church council or submitting to CNN. The original French publication of Monzan's book was in 1996, that is, when CNN was just becoming a truly global presence and satellite-fed media was not yet fully integrated within political power. Today, the relevance of her observation exceeds what she could have imagined. Is it not true that the greatest threat to political hegemony today comes from challenges to just this iconic authority? If the media does not see something, it has no political existence, and conversely, if the media sees it, photographs of Abu Ghraib are a notorious example, then the room of hegemonic power can be deafened. What differentiates the attacks of September 11, 2001 from other instances of terror is precisely its destruction of the visual economy of America's power. Terrorism is the iconoclasm of our time. Next. Oh! Well, it's okay. This is pretty much together. Iconoclasts, this is back now to the Byzantine. Iconoclasts are not against the power of the image. They want to control it. They want to monopolize the visual economy. That is, the Byzantine emperors wanted to monopolize the visual economy, putting themselves on coins, for instance, and taking away that power to produce icons from the church economy. That's what the struggle is about. Both sides, the church authorities and the emperor, were against idolatry, which rendered its practitioners, quote, unworthy of sovereignty. The debate is not on the icon, but on its appropriation and control. This is true of the mediated savvy bin Laden, and it is true as well of the image makers in the American presence. Monzan describes the struggle between Byzantine emperor and Byzantine church as a case of two bureaucracies, ecclesiastical and imperial, vying for visual control. She calls these competing image managers iconoclats. And in an era when iconoclats led by Karl Rove to the White House were able to force iconoclats in the news media to toe the patriotic line on the Iraq War, we even more than Monzan at the time she was writing appreciate what global havoc can be wrought by the iconocrats, today's practitioners of what Hannah Arendt called the analogy of econ, implementers, not creators of policy, who, it really says, were only doing their job. Next. In fact, historical outbreaks of iconoclasm are a mark of weakness, not strength, reflecting a division between divine and earthly power that is already taking place. This was true of the Byzantine struggle of the 8th and 9th centuries, when more than half of the 5 Christian patriarchies, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem, had been for generations in lands claimed by the new Muslim Empire. It was true at the time of the Protestant Reformation, the iconoclasts of the Protestant Reformation, when the centrifugal force of national monarchies ruled the Holy Roman Empire apart and history led, when 2 orders of power, the supranational global economy in which the visual industries now operate, and the ultranationalist political hegemony that the Bush administration proclaimed globally, as both strive, at times as allies, at times as adversaries, for control over the visual economy. The iconic function of the news is its capacity visually to appear to close the gap between the sovereign figure and the people as an abstraction, or alternatively, to widen that gap beyond repair. Are the rulers false gods, empty idols, not worthy of sovereignty? Are the news iconocrats, on the other hand, traitors to the Republic, or are they defenders of the true belief? Whoever monopolizes visibility conquers thought itself and determines the shape of liberty, writes Monzan. No power without an image. No power without an image. Nothing is clearer to the millions of American citizens who demonstrated repeatedly against U.S. imperial aggression than the fact that media news controls the economy of democratic belief. Protest against the Bush administration's illegal policies and actions was a right, but it was not power when it remained invisible. In the 1960s and 1970s, the media's image economy worked for the benefit of theatrical politics, what Jacques Rancière describes as a political aesthetics of disruption, by creating an alternative political stage and producing new subjectivities that escaped the manipulation of media dissimilitude. Today, however, the monopolistic and privatized news industry diminishes these possibilities. The theatrics of opposition movements went unnoticed by the larger viewing public, playing to small audiences of the already converted. Live news is the living body of iconoclasy. Satellite video is the world become flesh. As we move from believing what we see to believing in what we see, not only when we see it, but when we don't. For their part, the Islamic militants pursue a visual policy of reality TV, as if only real blood, only real destruction, only acts of terror against the public viewers could produce the disruptive, disagreeing images that escape hegemonic control. But this tactic can also be rendered ineffective by faithful exit. Next scene. This is what I thought was actually. And this is the iconoclastic moment when the visual economy of U.S. power was attacked. But attacked in an iconic image, which is just fighting over who's going to control the economy. But this tactic can only be rendered ineffective by the faithful. In the metaphysical world of the autonomy, the believer interprets such violence as this act as the work of the devil. Exorcism becomes the beauty of the patriotic manager of iconic display, whether in the White House or on Fox News, for only the master of the image, that is, the iconoclast, will know what is right, good, and excellent to render visible. Sovereignty cannot rule, it has no legitimacy, and therefore no power, if it does not partake in this visual positive truth. The iconomics of power goes far beyond the policing function. News iconicity is fertile, generative, and proliferating. This is our new political situation, and it is slowly exposed. The icon has no frame, no limiting values, just as in Carthaginia's influential account, empire has no frame, and the multitude that inhabits it is itself a shadowy icon on a global screen, anonymous, amorphous, not yet an alternative to iconoclastic denomination. And with these considerations on the historical, metaphysical, political level, I now want to turn from the iconomics of sovereign power to the cinematology of Alexander Borov. So now we're going to have some black slides. So next. So Borov's sovereign cinema. The Russian director, Alexander Borov, recently completed 3 films on 20th century rulers who were icons of absolute power. Hitler, famous movie Stalin, 1929. Lenin, famous movie Shores, Years in the Past, and Hirohito, famous movie Sun, 2004. This trinity of sovereign figures ranged on the political spectrum from fascist to communist to divinely ordained emperors, and their cultural contexts were strikingly diverse. The film trilogy evoked controversy. Hitler appears not to know about the concentration camps. Lenin is not responsible for his political decisions, and the depiction of Hirohito neglects the fact that he refused to sue for peace before U.S. nuclear attack. Sokurov has been criticized for his, quote, contempt for politics and disregard of history, end quote, and for contributing to a turn to the right in cultural production. Audiences have been baffled by the film because they are an unconventional hybrid of documentary and fiction. Real history is the site of all the films. Hitler's invasion of Russia in summer of 1942, Lenin after his second stroke, and Hirohito's surrender to Kharkov. But the camera that once produced the iconicity of these rulers and public figures operates here in films on a private level. The point of view of the camera is that of the servants or guards. And what is there to see? These 20th century leviathans, iconic embodiments of monstrous power in the modern age, are presented to us as infinite, powerless, and dying. The audience is disappointed. We no longer expect to be shown as saviors of the collective, but rather as the Antichrist, the iconic embodiment of monstrous evil, a Satan who leads the people astray. We want to see these one-time icons smashed. We might even have tolerated seeing them somehow perversely redeemed, but we are given neither righteous judgment nor redemption. The Quran provides no satisfaction for our iconoclastic desire that is met by conventional films about historically defeated leaders, and the effect on us is deeply disturbing. Every film produces its own visual content. A relation of elements from reality as a meaningful whole, miraculously making visible the invisible, frameless, and mobile world that they portray. The iconic power of images is essential for this miraculous effect. The industry, the cinema industry, is frank in acknowledging that movie stars are idols, venerated by a public whose affective engagement, their false belief, is both illusory and extreme. But documentary film is supposed to operate differently. The portrayal purports to use the iconic authority of the image to the iconic power of the cinema form is fully engaged, the capacity to turn intensities, color, sound, and mood into a palpable experience of presence. But the strangely crafted convergence between documentary detail and stage theatrical effects goes against the grain of documentary conventions, affecting us on a different level. Form, the cinematic economy, becomes conflict. These films are not about the sovereign power of national leaders, they are about the sovereign power of the vision, the experience of the image, and how it relates to political belief. No power without an image. Our iconoclastic desire is for evil rulers to be responsible for historical catastrophes so that true sovereignty can be restored and humanity redeemed. The world turns this logic inside out. The sovereign is not responsible. Absolute rulers are powerless. And the audience disappointment begins to set up its own economy. Our complicity in the construction of sovereign power is offered up to us for critical investigation. Next. On the left is the real Hitler, and on the right is really the boy who plays Hitler, as depicted in Sakharov's poem, arranged the four men, Goebbels and Goebbels' wife Magda, to join Eva Braun for a private getaway at the Berchtesgaden retreat. The camera brings us into the presence of Hitler during an unremarkable day of petty events. He ruminates on meat eating over vegetarian soup, indulges in hypochondriacal obsession, defecates out of doors, and makes inane, if not insane, conversation. He tyrannizes the group not by his will, but by the arbitrariness of his actions. Like living with a child on the brink of a tantrum, the most trivial moments seem precarious. It is not sure Hitler understands what he is doing. At an afternoon outing, the guards appear to be protecting the German people from viewing the silly antics of their rulers, while we look through their moving legs and observe all. Next. This is a still defined the will by limitation. We are interested in how the miraculous economy of sovereign power interacts with the miraculous economy of the cinematic image. We recall Riefenstahl's pseudo-documentary, Triumph of the Will, in which the erratic potential of cinema is used to reinforce the iconic connection between their hero and us both, moving the audience to empathic identification. Riefenstahl's role as an iconocrat was to make the film miracle and the miracle of sovereign power converge. The contrast with Moloch could not be greater. The world sets these two miraculous powers against each other so that we must either give up faith in the cinematic economy or faith in the economy of sovereign power. It is a critical strength of the film to take us away from the hero-anti-hero binary. The illusion of heroism, writes Sakharov, is to be avoided at all costs. Hitler appears as a man who has no stairs. The visual climax of this film, in terms of the economy of cinema, is the entertainment from that figure. Hitler watches a newsreel of war propaganda, an historically authentic documents, and uses the actual newsreel in the film of the Deutsche Wochenschau, depicting a Nazi triumph on the Eastern Front, the summer of 1942, that led to the brutally devastating Battle of Stalingrad, and indicates to us the historical moment in which the poem takes place. The camera cuts outside the viewing to a contemporary real shot, that is, in the figure of 1999, of the Bavarian landscape. Beethoven's Ninth Symphony plays in that. Cut back to the entertainment, showing the newsreel of Knappersbusch conducting a 1942 concert performance of the Beethoven Symphony that has layers of historical allusion. The wars of Pauline and Beethoven's own time, the Nazi program of spreading German culture around the world, and in our time, the symphony's performance of the official celebration of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Next. So this is the image acting Ava Braun and Maggie Gribble squeal with pleasure when they recognize Joseph Gribble's life-size image in the audience, and they press bodily against the screen to touch those newsreel figures. Behind the screen, the shadow figure of Hitler plays conductor, pretending to orchestrate the whole. This triple montage is brilliant cinema, the construction of an economy of affective engagement that superimposes archive and acting, real film and film reel, audience view and viewing audience, a convergence of economies that leads us to want to carry out our own positioning, as the film blocks the miraculous economy of sovereign power by means of the miraculous economy of the image. If not historical forces, then we are historians. The finger of responsibility. So, a priest visits. He comes as a suppliant before him, whom he addresses as a holy man, begging him to spare a life, bestowing upon Hitler the saintly role of intercession. Hitler responds from the universal perspective of sovereign power that treats individual victims as totally irrelevant. Quote, millions of lives die, but there are still lives. He then states slowly with sudden clarity the secret truth of sovereign rule. Quote, if I win, everyone will pray to me. If I lose, then the most absolute nothing will treat me as it were nothing. Ava Braun acts the role of a mysterious worshiper of Hitler, but does not believe it. Hitler, who cannot hide his infinite from her, is relieved. As they tussle in his bedroom, she bursts out, "You are nothing, zero," and he appears delighted. The humanity of this sadomasochistic exchange is its redeeming honesty. In the film's first scene, Ava fingers a locket that contains two images, Hitler and the Madonna and Child. Ava is all body, vital, and athletic, yet virginal, and it causes her visceral pain. The women in all of Sakurova's films are the redemptive moment in the literal sense of the Theotokos, the Mother of God, accomplishing the humanization of a non-human, indeed inhuman force. But Ava's destruction of the aura of Hitler's power brings no salvation. In Moloch, the documentary fragments cannot be pieced together to create a human, where a sovereign was once imagined. Next. In 1924, Mayakovsky composed a poem on the occasion of Lenin's death. And there it is. Lenin жил, Lenin жив, Lenin будет жить. Lenin lived, Lenin lives, Lenin will live. In the film, Taurus, eternal life is precisely what we do not see. This is the second Lenin is shown having already suffered 2 strokes, as failing, fading, drifting in and out of clarity and bodily control, repeating constantly to his caretakers, "Ya saw, I'll do it myself." But even physical autonomy is no longer possible. We are shown Lenin smashing objects and overturning the lunch table, Lenin dragging himself from the bed, being heaved into a car, and standing in a tub to be bathed. In Moloch, the sovereign figure of Hitler acts the part of the human that he cannot be. The judgment here of Lenin is less severe. The camera focuses on his all too human, mortal body, mere life, naked before us as before his servants. It takes great effort to move this natural body with its heavy material force. But materialism be damned, Lenin has no desire to shake off this mortal coil. Next, okay, so those are all incidentally the same actor in the plays Lenin. Okay. No one telephones from Moscow. Lenin's country dacha is totally cut off from political power. This hero of the nation's electrification lives in the shadows. Lenin comments that thunderstorms are the manifestation of electricity, not as his mother believed the result of angels fighting in heaven. Yet he refuses to accept heaven's indifference that his own materialist philosophy is true. Lenin wills against history, against time, against his own material body, and they defeat him. Material history, transient and forgetful, trivializes human determination. In this film, only nature in its ungovernable and careless abundance, the field of wild flowers, summer thunder, the forest and the wind, insistent birds at sunset, only these first against his own conclusion. We engage with the leader at a scandalous level of exposure, and yet this loss of aura is the opposite of equity. Its effect is profound and even spiritual precisely because it is anti-iconic. Natural images of the physical world made timeless by the miracle of cinema suggest a materialism in metaphysics, where the detail of Kutskaya fighting a hole in the stocking carries more affective power than the entire mythology of the military past. Stuff is physics. His posturing of solidarity with the dying man does little to conceal his plotting against the self-proclaimed heir apparent of Lenin's power. For a revolutionary regime, the problem of succession is critical, and it is by revering the dead body of Lenin, setting his corpse up as itself the icon of materialist belief, venerated by the masses who made a pilgrimage to Lenin's sepulchre, that Stalin, as his successor, will provide for his own legitimation. Next, these are officials appearing at the corpse that we have to do with quote, Khrushchevsky, are the successes of higher science able to resurrect people who have decomposed or not? No, says Khrushchevsky. You are lying, accused Sachev without opening his eyes. Marxism can do anything. Why is it that Lenin lies intact in Moscow? He is waiting for science. He wants to be resurrected. Lenin became an icon only after his death. His wife, Krutskaya, recalled that in the weeks of Bolshevik rule, nobody knew Lenin's face. In the evening, we would often stroll around Smolny, and no one would ever recognize him because there were no portraits there. She strongly opposed his mummification. If you want to honor the name of Vladimir Ilyich, she wrote, build daycare centers, kindergartens, homes, and schools. And Horowitz's study of the king's two bodies describes the symbolic double as ideal form of a merely human king that can guarantee the perpetuation of sovereign rule after death and natural decay. But in the Soviet inversion of Christ's resurrection, it is the flesh of the human sovereign that does not decay. The material body exists in perpetuity, as miraculously as a movie star's image on the screen. The sacrifice of Lenin's natural body to iconic power allowed Stalin to develop a living cult personality as his successor. In the 1930s, the inclusion of Lenin icons extended the autonomy of the revolution everywhere in the landscape of daily Soviet life. Lenin corners replaced religious icons at home. Cinema, the importance of which was recognized by Lenin, was recruited for the iconic task. In the 1930s, particular actors became recognizable as the prototype of Lenin, who repeated portrayals in videographic films. Lenin statues, the busts, and pins, these reiterations were meant to be material evidence that Lenin is always with us, effecting the apparent elimination of historical transience by extending the recent past limitlessly into the future. Against this myth, the film Florence takes a cinema icon out of Lenin's living body in decay. The vulnerability of life is raised to a metaphysical level, a materialism of physics suggesting a transformed vision of political legitimation. Next, Solnsa, or the sun, third of the world's films. It is a meticulously filmed account of Hirohito, the last divine emperor of Japan, at the moment of his surrender to General MacArthur and his abdication of power as descendant of the Shinto sun goddess. Issei Ogata plays Hirohito on the left, and on the right you have a real people in military dress on horseback. Now the cinematic strategy here adapts to the specific conditions of Hirohito's sovereign power, portraying his defeat as liberation from the ritualized existence that had appropriated his material body since birth. As he lives now in defeat, on the brink of falling into being merely human and no longer the descendant of the goddess, the servants persist in investing his person with divinity. Every physical motion is an act of faith as they serve his meals, record his words, emperor speaks frankly to his valet that his body is no bigger than the rest of humanity. The servant, buttoning in his clothes with ceremonial care and causing drops of sweat to appear on his bowed neck, responds, quote, "Everyone knows the emperor is God." There could not be a clearer definition of the sovereign as icon, God become man, whom the people worship and love. The emperor reflects, and because of this love I could not stop the war. Hirohito did not grab power. Divinity was not his choice. He has no stake in continuing the myth that has imprisoned him as tightly as the war butler to which he is confined. This descendant of the sun is exposed to natural light only by climbing up from the underground quarters to his science laboratory, where, with Allied planes still bombing above, he indulges in his hobby called marine biology. Next. But it is for all reference, echoing that of the servants is for the material world, the beauty of which appears as transcending all historical legends of good and evil, ebb and flow, destruction and triumph, victory and defeat. In both content and form of the film, it is human care itself, character, as the world shows us, and here we can move. Next. Again, as in Moloch, the filmic climax, and I have no image of this because you can't find it on the web. The filmic climax is an interplay of visual layers without verbal commentary or concepts, a cinematic economy that approaches pure thought solely through the relationship of images. It happens in this movie when the emperor is alone, except for the servant who watches to a crack in the door, except of course for ourselves. Hirohito lies down from his scheduled nap. We watch his sleeping body, first agitated by bad dreams, then calm, curled on its side, eyes closed and a smile on his face. It is after he awakens that, eyes wide open, he sees a vision, and we see it too, as a background noise of exploding bombs continues seamlessly into the dreamlike sequence. Shadows, fish horns, swimming in the sea, morphing as the noise grows louder into bomb horns falling through the sky, and in the background, the underwater depths, there shimmers the liquid fire of burning cities, the absolute material destruction of artifacts on the fragile life and precarious nature below. The vision stops. There is silence except for the clock. The emperor gets up, goes to his desk, sits, and prepares his statement. He writes to his son of the terrible defeat, explaining our people have too much faith in the empire and hated the Americans. He composes a walkout poem that speaks of the transiency of nature and fleetingness of time. Quote, "The sakura blossom, January snow, neither lasts long, frosty white, frosty whirlwind, the death swallows both." He takes out an album of photographs. The clock continues to be laughter. The sequence of photos that we view and view the emperor viewing is archival, consisting of staged photographs that are themselves documentary facts. Next. He looks at this image. It is in fact the image of Hirohito as he is inaugurated into the imperial office, the occasion of his enthronement. And also the empress with their eldest son, Akihito, as mother and child, in the iconic mode of Theotokos, the Virgin Christ, the Virgin Mary and Christ. The emperor leans down to kiss this icon and then wipes the surface with a handkerchief completed on his touch. The photographs continue. Western movie stars, Greta Garbo and Marlene Dietrich. He bows his head close to these idols, but then shakes if it's like disapproval. Two loose photographs. Hitler and the German Kaiser. Hitler alone. Hirohito, who never met puzzles open. The servant announces the arrival of American soldiers who will take him to MacArthur. Next. When he exits the house, the U.S. photographers explain that he looks like Colonel Chapman. He is pleased to be mistaken for a movie star. Next. Here is a photograph of Hirohito that appeared in the American press with Harvard style. Sokurov has copied such visual documents meticulously. Next. This is Stoker. Thereby achieving the look of the photograph original. A series of Life in Life magazine. Next. The first to show the Japanese emperor to the American public. Contains formal and thematic elements that reappear in Sokurov's images in ways too close to the accidental. You see, he's looking through a microscope at the bottom, and in the middle is something in formaldehyde, and he's got a kind of Charlie Chaplin outfit on. The official version of history in Japan as well as the United States is that the American invasion and prolonged military occupation brought the Japanese people democracy, liberating them, particularly their women, from the bonds of the imperial past. Hirohito's willingness to acquiesce to this interpretation is the reason that his life was spared. Next. Here you have just a juxtaposition of the documentary photograph and the still version. But Sokurov's portrayal of the towering, confident military commander MacArthur as he interacts with the diminutive, frank, and worldly polyglot Hirohito gives us pause. MacArthur's smug assertions of the superiority of American democracy are hurled at Hirohito with a victor's sense of right that can easily be read as racial arrogance. And there is no hint of apology in his description of America and its special form of imperialism. MacArthur says, quote, "You know why the United States does not catch fish? Because we can buy all living creatures. We don't need the territory." One does not sense that under the new command the world will be more human. There's not a trace of Orientalism in the film. The figure of Hirohito transcends national type and allegorical meaning. His humanity is overwhelmingly present. This cinema document does not justify history. It does not take place in the register of historical time at all. The curious effect of our empathy with the figure of the defeated emperor is to remove us totally from the economy of sovereign power, with its iconic order of good and evil, grounded in collective identifications. We are able to see our liberation from sovereign power in and through the liberation of this one human being from his sovereign role, something that the emperor's own people do not want because it makes their historical sovereignty meaningless. This is my conclusion. In 1936, Stalin announced that the building of socialism was essentially completed. A man of peasant origins recalled that day. Quote, "I had just returned from my native village in the Vyatka region, lost in the depths of the forest, cut off from the world by lack of roads. In the isthmus there was blood and cockroaches, and because of the lack of kerosene they had to go back from lamps to candles. I wouldn't have thought anything of that. After all, before us shone the beacon of the bright future which we were building with our own hands. Maybe we would still have to labor for another 5 or 10 years, straining all our forces, but we'd get there." And suddenly it turned out that this was socialism all around. Never, neither before nor after, have I experienced such disappointment, such grief. What is being sanctified here? Sokurov says of his films, natural life. In Sansa, the greatest of the trilogy, there is no typicality in the treatment of either the conquered or the victors, whose triumph caused such material devastation. There is only authenticity of actors and actions, the carefully recorded details of daily life, but it is precarious life, raw, already wounded, exposing the enormous metaphysical responsibility of humankind. This is not an answer to the problem of sovereignty. It is a different articulation of the question. I think I'm the only one with a microphone, but I'm very happy to take questions or comments. Yes.
I have a question. In terms of the contemporary aspects of this With the Barack Obama campaign, design and iconography was a very successful component, and at the same time, it promoted real change compared to the sort of sovereignty of Bush. I was wondering if you had any.
Well, funny, I've been writing about Obama and the image, and since actually August. It's a response to W.J.P. Mitchell, who was in this venue not so long ago. And I almost wanted to change it, but then it had already been advertised as what it was, so I didn't. And this other piece is a kind of shorter piece, but I deal directly with this thing, right? And as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, yeah, you have to ask, well, how about the last election and what was going on there? And I think that, for me, the really important iconic empowerment of that electoral process was precisely where he said, which is, this is not about me. Right? So the icons that are important are the ones of the audiences. Or, the people in Grant Park, or the people behind him at the Iowa caucus, right? It's about the empowerment of citizens. And yet you find all the time the desire of mass media and the desire of, the culture industry to make him the iconic figure, right? And we had, I think the inaugural day itself was a perfect example of that, because you had the total iconicity of sovereign power from Cheney, such politeness on the stage, right? And then in the audience, people were booing when George Bush came out. So they were playing a different, visual economy, if you will. And it was very hard in the disjuncture. And I think this is a real struggle to keep the empowering image from becoming an image of sovereign power. Not the man, but the movement. But you can just see the iconocrats struggling over who's going to own this power. What I mean by this I wanted to make that distinction because, economy, I think we have made an icon of the invisible economy. In other words, there's a logic of the economy which is absolutely the same as the Christian economy, right? Which is the economy works by an invisible hand. We are sure it exists. We are sure there is something called economy. It acts lawfully, whatever, right? It can get out of joint. It has to be, managed, whatever. But we refer to the economy from its visible manifestations. But we understand that it is an invisible hand. And so the relationship between, the invisible force to which reverence is given, and the material existence, I think we have to look at our whole discourse of the economy as a kind of iconoclasy, right? And of course, it's now in trouble. So we're going to have a lot of smashers in that. But those smashers may not, this is the point of, and I realize it's maybe too short here to really make sense if we don't know too much about the iconoclastic debates between the emperor and the church in the 7th and 8th, the 8th and 9th century, early 9th centuries. But you smash the idols so that you can restore iconic power. You don't eliminate pictures totally. You want to control them. Right? So if you see now a kind of struggle over, what is the true economy of the economy, I think that's what's happening right now. The conservatives are saying we know what the true economy is, which is the market is a tenet of faith and we must believe in it and let it work. And then you're having others saying, no, that is idolatry to do that. Right? So I think there's an analogy there. It's very strong. As a matter of fact, something, envisioning the economy was something I wrote in the early 1990s just on this thing. How is it that the economy was discovered as somehow so powerful just when we discovered that it was invisible? I.e. without its limit. Yes. Yes. Oh, and why didn't I think that? Right.
And what you actually have from the power in terms of critical theory and
Yeah, well, I think that's
a term like news media
right.
or some
Right.
sort of
I think
like
that's
a social.
yeah, I think that's really very limited. I mean, I wrote a book on it about Adorno, and I don't like that part of it. And I think that it's very limited to just take the commodity and commodity fetishism and make that somehow the answer to everything, as if we can see through it. Because since Baudrillard, at least, we have known, and Mitchell does this too, that images have a power. They're not just illusory. The image itself is powerful. So I would say that would definitely separate me from classical Marxist or critical theory. Definitely. I mean, I don't think that the commodity understood in a capitalist way and its fetish character gets at the problem of sovereignty, which I think in its modern form is precisely this need to make visible the invisible, i.e. the American people. No one ever saw the American people. You can't find it anyplace. It's an idea. And the interesting thing is that sovereigns act to protect the American people, and they don't give a damn that 90% of the population is against what they're doing, because their concept of the American people is an ideal type. It's a platonic form. And Lenin did the same thing against the workers' opposition in the early days of the revolution. He said, I can't listen to what the workers actually want. I have to do what's in the interest of the proletariat, the workers. Right? And then the head of the workers' opposition stood up and said, Lenin, unfortunately, this is the workers you've got. You don't have other workers. But that guy lost. And Lenin said, okay, because the workers don't have the right interests at heart, the party will rule in the name of workers. Right? So this is a metaphysical / theological residue. That's
Can you speak louder?
Yeah, can you speak up?
Can you stand up?
Stand up,
We can
that's
all hear the
always
question.
I'll stand up.
So my question or comment is about your interpretation of Sakuras view, which actually, if I got it right, your main argument was that Sakura is kind of, if we can use this term, humanizing the figures, kind of showing them that they are actually ordinary people, and you kind of oppose this interpretation, this state, to the hero anti-hero scheme, which you think is here in the West or in the American context. What I was thinking, because I saw it, this one of the field.
Which one?
Pauline. And what I really want to comment on and ask you that question is that in Russian context, the image of the sovereign has always been working on the scheme dictator and a human being. So this scheme, the dictator and the human being, is not actually a contradiction in the Russian context. This is, to my mind, which testifies this is I think, a rhetoric that surrounds the Russian image of so sovereign, the parental, what can be called the parental, parental rhetoric, Papa Stalin, Dad Stalin, and on the other hand, just recently just now I remember Putin's remark that we Russians in Russian politics have always paid due regard towards human value. So in Russian context, I think these two are actually inseparable. And this was to me the alternative that Russian dictatorships were to provide to the Western ones. And what I'm asking is, don't you think that it was decontextualized or?
Yeah, absolutely, and this is absolutely. I mean, here's yes, but one has to ask. You know, you were talking about the Lenin film. Many people have seen the Moloch. That's the easiest to get a copy of. It's oldest and it's actually available on DVD rather easily. The so-and-so was sent to me by my friends in Moscow, so it was Japanese with Russian subtitles, which was tough going. But it does exist now with a British dubbed subtitles. Very. But the point that I think people didn't like the Moloch one at all because it showed Hitler out of context. It didn't seem to have anything documentary to do with Hitler. And you're saying that in fact it's very decontextualized for the very specific Russian problematic. But I think that's precisely what Sakharov is purposely doing, because then the third one is Norwegian. You wouldn't have three more different contexts. They're totally different contexts. And he wants to look at something else. He wants, I think, at least that's the way I'm reading him. And I actually gave this first in Moscow. And I don't know what he thinks, although I think he's seen what I've said. I'm sure he likes it because at least I'm not criticizing him like most of the people. And I hear he has a bit of an ego. But the point that I think is interesting is that you can watch these out of context, and they say something to you. But what they say is all about the cinema image. It's nothing about the historical fact. I mean, the images are phenomenal. I mean, this one, it's almost maybe too romantic, the way he has these flowers, you know, the fields of flowers when they go to the picnic, and then this very, very dramatic lightning storm. These are, you know, and yet it's black and white. Extremely powerful cinema, right? And the power of it is not about what it says about a leader, but it's what it says about material reality, the transient metaphysic significance. I mean, to me, it's an absolute inversion of the logic of sovereignty. So yes, it's decontextual. And I actually think that, you know, the book that just came out, the new essay in it, the one that's not legal in Haiti, which has been out for a while, but the new one, which is called Universal History, is a total rejection of multiculturalism and multiple modernities and all of that. And it's because I never found any culture that I like. I think all cultures screw certain people in it, right? So I don't really want to save every little culture out there, because, you know, if you're the person being sacrificed by the Aztecs, it's not such a great place, right? And for women, it hasn't been great, right? So I just think that cherishing cultures is not the way I want to go, but what I want to do is somehow redeem the material body of the individual who can fall out of any culture. And I do that from my Frankfurt School training, because it was Adorno who thought he was German. He didn't know he was Jewish. He thought he was German. And then the Germans said, no, you're not. Right? This is the moment that any culture is capable of. No, I didn't. I mean, you got me at a very, very vehement thing. I'm not trying to actually make you have a burden of all this. Yes. Hi.
I'm disturbed by this return of the anthropomorphic sovereign and your vocation to pluralists. I thought Foucault has cured us of this problem, and I think where it really becomes very concrete in your analysis of Obama. If the notion of iconocratic sovereignty is going to pertain, then the shift from Bush to Obama can change absolutely nothing in terms of the logic of the system. And I think it hasn't. I think Obama's appeal to popularism has to be seen in relation to his militarism. In the sense that what happens in the wall in Washington is this classic moment of the filling in of the empty space of democracy as described before, and what's going to succeed that, or what counterbalances that, is Obama's abandonment of the bad war in Iraq and his redirection of American image-making through bombs, through torture, through political terror in Afghanistan and the northwestern borders of Pakistan, which is where he's going next, and where Guantanamo is going to migrate to as well, because you cannot carry out a counterinsurgency war without the type of image-making practices that we see in Guantanamo. They'll be replicated in Afghanistan or other black sites. And I think that's where the image economy has to be analyzed and located. And in relation to that, I'm kind of disturbed by the allocation of that, we in the West, in the first world, are satisfied with the simulacrum, while so-called Muslim terrorists have had concrete, tangible blood, guts, smoke, and fire. I think that's a kind of ethnocentric, particularly for Jewish culture, but a kind of ethnocentric dichotomy. And I don't understand why destruction of the World Trade Center cannot be seen as a moment of image making as well, and why it should be stereotyped as iconoclasm. So I think if I was going to connect this to Montaigne's work, she moves past the anthropomorphic sovereign, and towards the end of her book, she really focuses on iconography and spatiality, the construction of spatial units, and the people's dwelling in these kind of iconic spatial structures. I think we have to see Iraq, Abu Ghraib, we have to see what's going to be happening in Afghanistan with further intensity in the next couple of years, as the construction of these spatial structures in which sovereignty is going to image itself. And it's going to be the Americans who are going to be dealing with blood and torture. And again, another connection would be the fact that Obama has been completely silent, or almost completely silent, about what's been happening in the country. Right? It's another event of a sovereign image, right, on the bodies and bones of Palestinian children and civilians.
Okay, well, I mean, obviously you may be right, but you are predicting. So maybe the prediction is right.
Obama is making the
Wait, hold on. What
between
Obama
good and bad
says
wars.
and what he
That's his
doesn't
prediction.
say at this moment, I mean, the man is very, very cautious. I mean, I'm not defending him or not right now. Okay. Couple of things. And it's also in this Obama piece. Israel lost the war of images. There's no doubt about that. When the New York Times can't be half-half, equal, you know that Israel lost that war. And that's in the United States, not to speak of the rest of the world. That would be one thing. A second thing, I think, is that the most hopeful thing, and I don't know, I can't predict any more than anybody else, and none of us know, and I can be very, very pessimistic very soon, right? That comes easily. It comes easily about the present political situation. However, if in fact what is being shown to us is the empowerment of our own image, then you might have an opportunity for that image to protest against precisely the things you're afraid will happen. What I'm saying is, when the war broke out in 2003, there was one sending, the world wants peace, and everybody sent in their images. You remember that protest on February 15th? And it made not a dent in the media. There were protests in Washington. There were protests in front of the UN. They made not a dent in the media. We're talking about the iconic power. And if I read Monzant to say that iconoclasts are precisely making icons, that is the whole thing. They know the power of the icon. They're not anti-image. They're anti the other people having the power over the image. So that, I think, was just a difference in the way you read Monzant and the way I read Monzant. I really think, and this again is hope, right? Hope that this can mark a space. I mean, people, how can you be totally pessimistic about the kind of images that we saw following Obama? I'm not talking about Obama. Who cares about Obama? I'm talking about Iraqi journalists throwing shoes. I'm talking about Greek kids pirating in to a newscast on Paramount Lease with a banner saying, "Stop watching television, get out in the streets." That's what I'm talking about, right? Why do we allow the whole image empowerment to be sucked back in to what was happening on the podium on January 4th, rather than what was going on in front of the podium?
That's my point. That orchestration is a new sovereign construction. Those images of Greek students riding in Takla Square, the images in Gaza are marginalized in the American media. They're not part of the American political consciousness. People in Iraq, people in Gaza died invisibly as far as American political culture. In the campaign, Obama and the people who was campaigning against Clinton in the UK only talked about American casualties. It was their image that dominated the political discourse. The images of the Iraqi dead wounded
This is really tough because we are comrades, so to speak, for life, right? And I'm going to say he has given up leftism. The leftism I have embraced all my life, and maybe I have to. And maybe I'll be sorry, but maybe I have to. And I'm teaching Marx right now. We read Harvey's Limits of Capital. It was fun to teach in the fall. I was teaching in the fall, right? Because suddenly it was all relevant. But you had to teach undergraduates the whole shebang. You had to teach them all of Marx's writing, plus Foucault and Althusser and blah, 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 right? And they know nothing. But then you had some help, which was capital crash, right? So that was helpful. So, I mean, I'm not saying that knowledge is useless. It's very useful, right? But I just, I think that if we say already it's sewn up, it's impossible, look at what he said, look at who he put in power. I mean, if you're going to be a pragmatic person, and we in the Academy are not very pragmatic, who but a Clinton to begin to pull back from a certain imbalance in the U.S. Who but Obama to say in his first foreign press interview, Muslim, I have Muslims in my family. That was pretty good. He didn't mention it on the campaign trail. No, he didn't. And we have yet to hear him speak Indonesian, which he speaks. That's going to be a nice moment. So there are a lot of things that haven't quite been thrown out there. But, I mean, you could convince me with, all you have to do is that, and I'd fall into your lap. If you can.
Just to say, finally, I don't want to hog the stage or not discourse, dialogue, that I think we have to move beyond anthropomorphic models of how this is where it's going to take us. I think Monzant is doing that, and Ramin is doing that in his place on the economy, and Foucault had already taught us how to do that. have to move away from that.
Well, the fact is, you and I can do it, and Foucault can do it, but the world is still doing it. That's my problem. We've already transcended these problems, and they stick around. That's why I think you have to go back to where they come from and see how they're still functioning today in their theological form. I don't think you could say, just because a bunch of intellectuals have transcended the problem that anthropomorphized sovereign power, that, you know...
Susan, the theological moment is not George Bush. He was a clown, and he was perceived as a clown. So he was not the embodiment of the incarnation of sovereign
not
power.
what I heard.
The theological moment was shock and awe. That's why it was called shock and awe. That was how American power was materialized.
I saw people say we have to stand behind our president because our country is under attack.
Yeah.
I heard that again and again and again.
Excuse me, can I interject?
Yes.
I have a question. I heard you talk back and forth about, like, you know, images and, like, you know, this dimension of images. It seems to me, though, that, you know, the way in which one mediates the meaning of images, especially when we're talking about the record of historical events, is the political realm, right? And the entire, this entire conversation, I felt a little bit that one was putting the cart before the horse, meaning that, you know, that images in themselves have somewhat of a draw and have some kind of progressive content in themselves. But, I mean, one of the points that you made that, you know, I found interesting was that, you know, that image of, you know, the World Trade Center is ambivalent in itself, right? It only acquires meaning through, you know, a kind of political mediation and its instrumentality, right? And that photograph in itself can mean so many things. It can mean, like, kind of deepening of understanding of our present, or it could mean, you know, it could just, like, invigorate patriotic sentiment, or it could be propaganda for the extremist right. And so it seems to me that, like, you know, I'm a little bit confused when we talk about power of images in themselves, because it seems what we're really talking about here, and if one, like, considers oneself to be progressive at all, is the necessity to create a context in which, you know, the presently constituted left, which really is not, we don't really have a left, right? I mean, Obama is not really the left, right? I mean, we all know that. But anyway, it just seems that the politics sort of drop out of the argument, that what's necessary to understand the power of images, so to speak, is you know, the mediation of meaning that is political.
Well, you see, here's where I would want to go, for instance, in the Obama deal. As the Spiegel says, the Messiah factor, the messianic factor, that's where this is gelling, I think, in the case of Obama. Not just, you know, I mean, you know, all Brazilian, in this meeting in northern Brazil, the black Brazilians said now our problem with racism will stop, right? I mean, you know, the kind of expectance of a kind of redemption. The United States thinking it will be redeemed from its terrible sins of the past, you know, we go on for several hundred years, you know. That's all messianic language, right? And I don't think that we will go wrong to look at it as a problem of the logic of the Messiah, particularly when we're dealing with Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, all of which share a messianic tradition. I think that there's a certain logic in that kind of philosophical problem, which benefits by being faced without contextualizing it into its absolute cultural specificity.
But so then we're talking about, you know, kind of description of an instrumentality of an image without giving it content. You're talking about sort of a mechanism of, you know, influence and ideological.
Well, see, okay, I guess I should have given the other talk, but then maybe you would have wanted to hear this talk, and I would have given the other talk. And did you hear Mitchell's talk?
Did I hear Mitchell's talk? No.
Yeah. Okay, well, it's all just a talk, right? But the point is that for him, there's a kind of autonomy of the image, and I think it's all about imagination. I don't think we should. I think it would fetishize the image if you gave the image so much life on its own that it was doing everything. It has to do with imagination. But imagination, it seems to me, doesn't separate culturally and it's hard to contextualize. But what's so interesting about that CNN image of the of September 11th, someone made a little film out of it, and it was in China, and of course the same image is in the background of the newscasters, the same exact image, right? And that's a kind of identity of visual experience, which is truly phenomenal. No text can do that because text is basically very much, right? Now, contextualization. You can't get at contextualization. You listen to C-SPAN, the call-up, right? You listen to everybody who's against a bill. They're against it for the most bizarre reasons. None of them are against it for the same reason. I don't know how you can contextualize and know. These things are much wilder than that. I think we've been kidding ourselves to say that we can actually nail down a context. These things have an ability to escape frame. And less critical analysis of what's bad about films or bad about images, and more hands-on use of images. Who can deny that YouTube is one of the most progressive tools that we have in image dissemination? Right? It's phenomenal. That, I mean, if we just sit here in our critique of the culture, I mean, this is someone who cut her teeth on Adorno, right, and the culture industry. Do we just sit here in the critique of the culture industry, the critique of the simulacrum, the critique of the fetish, et cetera, we're losing the fact that this was an enormously powerful moment for the technology of the image. So rather than analyze what it means, we just take it and use it a different way. I mean, there's got to be a practice here, not just a critical critique.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that later part. I mean, but it seems to me that again we're talking about the instrumentality of the image and the potential of its usage, and yet the forces that could use these images and the sort of new technology are non-existent.
Yeah, but I just think that we can't. It's like intent. If I have an intent for an image to be a certain way, I'm sorry, it doesn't stay there. It doesn't stay there. It moves into another thing where I have no control over its use. I mean, Jon Stewart is fantastic. He just takes the actual stuff and puts it on again. And he normally doesn't say anything, he just looks. Right? And suddenly, the intent of the media controllers disintegrates. Look at Tina Fey. She repeats word for word what Sarah Palin says, and the power that Sarah Palin thought she was achieving disintegrates. I mean, I really think that we're much too conservative in our critique of image politics. Yes.
I wanted to return to the theme that you were raising about the need to kind of return to the theological basis of powerful function of images in the current world. I said that I wanted to return to the theme of the theological that was being raised earlier. And I mean, what I read from that in terms of maybe an intellectual history is a kind of citation of Benjamin and maybe this is not like an adequate reading of your entire line of thinking, but it seems to me that this is like a quotation of Benjamin in that he says, okay, it's the famous first thesis on the philosophy of history where he talks about the wizened old hunchback in the puppet that is historical materialism, that is theology, it has to be kept out of sight, and he wants to reinvestigate that, he wants to say this needs to be reopened. But it seems to me that his argument at least is that the question is how does theology continue to exist under profoundly transformed conditions in which it can be enlisted in something like a modern struggle for political freedom that was supposed to be the movement of historical materialism, the purpose of the philosophy. And what I got to talk, at least the first half of the talk, was a kind of straight mapping on identity between what you call the concentration of power and authority and the ideological conformity produced by the iconoclasy of the Middle Ages, and that this carries over and directly describes the phenomena of the power of images under the Bush regime, for instance.
I think that Karl Rove types. I think that Obama's people tried to control the image.
Well, I guess
couldn't.
my question is, what kind of importance do you attribute to this profound transformation of conditions under which something like theology has a persistence? Is that?
Can I follow up on that question?
Yes.
My question.
Yes. Yes.
I was interested, and this might be another way of looking at it. I was interested in your because I guess my discomfort in current uses of theological language is its conflation with critique of sovereignty as it stands in modern state power and such. And I was wondering, and it seems to me that what's so beautiful, and I do think Monse's work is very much related to this kind of beautiful and philosophy, is precisely that. The science of image relations is a science of government, and the issue of iconoclasm and iconoclasy, I mean, these are issues about control of the image and what it means for the power of the image. This science of governing the image that is natural, artificial, invisible, all within kind of theological economy. So I'm just wondering, I'm just concerned that the conceptual resources that is theological this kind of becomes appropriate conventional uses of political theology. I wonder to what extent, Monse offered a way of thinking about imagination that is not something about the consolidation of the power of the majority, power to control.
Well, I mean, a lot is being said here, and I guess the way I would get at it, going back to Benjamin, I think Benjamin's very close to the world, right? It's the theology of the material, the transient material.
And also Mosaic proposes the theology of the material.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure because Alan is also leading in there some sort of spatiality, which I didn't quite get, but from Monsanto. But what I mean, this was written because I kept seeing it. I kept seeing this sovereign power that Bush took. It was a clown. Anybody could see it was a clown. Nonetheless, the office had that kind of reverence, right? And that reverence is religious, right? Now, theology is a big word, and if you're talking about a kind of theological respect for transient nature, I think you're talking Benjamin's language. You're certainly talking about something I would like to see, and something that Sokurov was trying to present. So I don't see, it's not just Schmidt political theology. I'm not trying to say that or Benjamin or any of these things exactly. What I'm really trying to do is work through an experience that others may doubt, that the sovereign power of the United States had a reverential invulnerability. But that's my experience the last 8 years is that was extraordinarily strong.
The invulnerability or
that people gave, because the country was under attack, and the people, the nation, the collective, somehow could be translated into a kind of granting of sovereign power and the state of exception to George Bush.
I guess I just wonder the implication of Mosai's work, or even the return to kind of Christian theology or iconography, is really something that gets you to that place of question, because it seems to me that that's what Mosai was trying to project of looking at the image of all icon gazing or the act of gazing, even her work on the previously derived, the exchange of gazes and martyrs and traditional gazing. In a sense, there's the exchange of a bodily act of looking at these
Right. Oh no. I mean, I don't want to. Look, she is a Byzantine scholar who's an expert on the period of iconoclasm. It's a very, very remote, specific kind of project.
But it's a very unique argument she's making about politics in the reading of iconoclasm that illuminates it. I mean, I see her doing something to say, look, we cannot reduce theology to these arguments about sovereignty in these particular forms that happen. That had happened in other environments. And I think Benjamin is also part of that. That's what I think is so provocative.
Well, I mean, I guess what you're saying is there's so much more to Monsanto than I used. I hope so. The book is almost 300 pages long. And you probably also are saying this one I will take apart because it's something that's always been a problem. Hopeless statement is what religious part is. I have a certain Brechtian vulgar go for the, nuts and the nuances of an argument. I'm less.
No, I apologize. I don't need to.
No, please don't, because the nuances are really, really important. It's just that my crude mind doesn't really get around it too much. I mean, for me, the important thing is to understand the present, right? And if there is a better way to look at the way Bush, the way I experience, that is, again, it's not Bush, it's what the people did giving Bush this power. There was a kind of invulnerability that he was allowed because he was the sovereign at the time that the nation was under attack. And that is scary, but it's there. Thanks. Thank you.
When you talk about the power of images, I'm thinking maybe there's a part of every person that's susceptible to the power of an image. And then some people have another part of their brain that says, oh, that's just an image. That's not really Jesus or Mary. That's not really Messiah. But there's a part of me that's reacting to it as though it was. So on a social level, you have a class of people who can intellectuals who can say, we're not susceptible to the power of images, but the masses are. And they elected George Bush. Do you accept that?
I'm totally susceptible to the power of images.
Yeah, but you have the part that says
they
that.
Dance. Totally susceptible. I mean, I'm part of those.
But
I don't think this is a rational problem. I don't think we can transcend it with reason alone. I just don't.
So why were you?
Three people with their hands up. Why don't the three people give their comments rather briefly, and then I'll just say whatever. Yes.
Well, my question is just if what you're talking about is a process, sort of drawing attention to a way of sort of unpacking and critiquing images and the way they control, the way they sort of manifest in political arenas, then don't you have to sort of say that the same kind of critique of what applies to Bush and people investing Bush with the sovereign, as the sovereign body, also extends to the person you like, that. I mean, that's the missing piece of the discussion for me. It's just that you have to sort of take it on.
I mean, I think that this whole sovereign aura is just congealing around Obama. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. No.
I mean, I absolutely agree. I think that Obama is working in a very different way. Same thing. He's got the state of exception, which gives him the right to move things forward. I mean, I'm thinking a lot. I haven't read it, but I know a little bit about that. When friends arguing about the shock doctrine, taking advantage of this childlike state, it seems to be this moment of awe, wonder, belief. He still passes his bill with zero partisan agreement, but whatever, it's moving ahead. And he's got the most facile, mobile image
that he constantly says, this is basically, it's not me, I'm a mirror, I'm reflecting you. And then if you look at the icons that are the ones that are rising to the surface, for example, the Hope image done by Shepard Fairey, who's a street artist, sort of like absolutely grassroots. And that was constantly, it's simplification. There's a viral element of that online where you can have yourself created in that image as well. So it works with the media very beautifully. Make yourself into Obama. If you look on his website, the Obama icon, the sun rising, is an O, and he's got a different variation of it for every potential constituent group. If you're green, if you're gay, if you're Hispanic, there's a new configuration of the elements of that icon that reflect exactly who you are. So he's playing the it's not me, I am your mirror, I am every man, I am endlessly. And so it's just very interesting.
I don't think he can control it. I don't think he can control it. I think we can take that away. In other words, I really don't think, like for instance, in this thing on the image of Obama, I don't put one image of Obama up there. It's all about people, right? And at this moment, rather than predict his downfall, I don't see why we don't, I mean, this is not you necessarily, but why we don't try to make it go someplace else.
Right, but you putting the people up there is doing exactly what his iconic message is, which is, it's the people. So you're using him as the mirror exactly as he's saying.
Well, then Agamben is right, and then democracy is totally a sham, and we just give up and all admit we're in a concentration camp and make no distinctions between real concentration camps and where we are. And I won't do that.
But we're in an audience of image makers. I mean, here we are,
right.
Okay. At the epicenter of it. Image making has changed. People have access to cameras. Everyone with a cell phone. Everyone who has a computer can distribute those images. So we have to admit that we are in a different moment of image making. And we can't just sit there and go, well, they're just going to turn it around on us and feed it back because we're doing the feeding and we're taking images. And I can't be completely hopeless about that, but we're in a different situation now. I mean, Israel didn't allow any journalists into Gaza, and yet so many images became.
That's a really good example. And yet those images were blocked from being shown the way they should be shown. Both things are true simultaneously. Abu Ghraib, they couldn't control. They would have loved to control that, but they couldn't. That's the moment that shoots past any kind of intent or regime of power that, and rather than critiquing the regime of power, we should be doing the other. That's really what I'm trying to push here.
My question's almost bibliographic. I'm wondering, with your intense use of the word sovereignty and your evocation of the Aztecs, and also you're talking about sort of the metaphysical qualities of the image, why both Bataille and Debord are absent from your discussion?
Bataille and?
Debord.
Debord. Well, because I'm not doing a talk on other people's ideas. I'm trying to think for myself. I think you all should. So no one say what I said. Think for yourself, right? I mean, this... what if you just hit another hot button with me, and that is, having worked on Walter Benjamin, and as a matter of fact, emphasized the image of Walter Benjamin, right? I've had to read an enormous amount of crap of people who, for want of an argument, say, as Walter Benjamin says, and then they quote something from some obscure text that no one knows what it meant, and they think that has somehow made a point, and that's not in these people. Not for us today. I mean, Debord, I loved him when he came out, but that was the 60s and 70s. I'm not saying he's not at all useful today, but it is a different situation. The means of production of an image is simply socialized.
I think that you could certainly argue that a lot of different ways. I'm not so sanguine about YouTube as the ultimate media democracy.
You know, democracy is the weirdest word. I think everybody here, if I said, raise your hand if you are for democracy, you'd all raise your hand, and yet none of you believes in democracy in any way, shape, or form. I mean, I'm overstating it. But, you know, I mean, I don't know what people would imagine democracy would look like. I mean, yeah, YouTube isn't democracy. I mean, that would be just crazy. But, you know, the capacity to retrieve images just because you want to see them, right? And then pass them on to a friend is huge. Why isn't anybody more hopeful? I mean, this is really kind of disheartening. But no, I had my students over 2 days ago, and we discussed the image in Obama, and they were as negative as I was positive. So, you know, I mean, maybe this is just craziness, but I have seen changes that are really extraordinary. I don't think that Obama had control over this whole thing. I don't think he did. I think the real crucial thing was how to let the image loose because other people were doing things with it versus control where the image is going. Those were contradictory tasks, and it was hard to negotiate. When it was loose, then you had people like, who was the little dog? Paris Hilton. Mine is a big dog. But the Paris Hilton doing, you know, essentially an ad for Obama. In other words, these things get moved around. They get reframed. Right? Intention is not any longer enough of an argument against or for an image.